Hello and welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of the hit 1970s sitcom MASH. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Vanessa.
Vanessa, today's episode involves the gang trying to set this world record. So, I wanted to ask you if you have any familiarity with any cool world records or like any stories about those Guinness Book of World Records book that they always had at like school book fairs that we had when we were like kids. I don't know if they still do that, but that's a very core memory for me in my childhood.
Yes. So when I was in elementary school in about third or fourth grade, those Guinness Book of World Record. Wow.
I know, it's hard to say.
It's hard to say. Those Guinness World Record books were such a hot commodity. There was always one copy in the classroom, and then everybody always wanted to get the copies at the Scholastic Book Fair. So, I have always been very fascinated with water and being submerged in water and holding my breath and whatnot. So even though this isn't super interesting or unique, I think that my favorite Guinness World Record is the longest time holding your breath underwater. So I did us the solid of looking it up.
Okay. Okay.
So as of 2023, the longest someone has held their breath was 24 minutes and 37 seconds.
That is the dream. That's like Aquaman right there. I want that superpower.
I love being submerged in water. I love holding my breath. It's such an odd thing, I know. So that was always my most, I always loved to see it, you know? And I also looked it up. So the category is technically called the longest time breath held voluntarily. And that is so scary to me that it was like voluntarily. I mean, it's funny, but also slightly terrifying. Yeah. So that was quite interesting when I looked it up.
Yes. Voluntarily is the operative word there. It's very important. That is cool though. I do like being in like pools and whatnot, and I've never been good at holding my breath. So I do sympathize with your dream of holding it longer and longer. For me, when we decided on this opening topic, I had to like go through a lot of stuff that I thought was just really, really gross. Like a lot of them were like longest toenail and like other gross stuff like that. It's like, no, that's not the fun world record at all. And I found one that I thought was really fun on boredpanda.com. So I'm not sure how like accurate this is, but apparently the record for the longest stand-up comedy is 40 hours and 8 minutes by this guy named David Scott. And that is such a specific record. And again, 40 hours, 8 minutes. It's a long, long time. But it's the kind of thing where you're like, I could beat that. Like if I had to, I absolutely could. That's not holding your breath underwater. Like you're not in any danger. You just gotta like write a few more jokes, you know? You gotta like really just have the core stamina to tell jokes for 40 hours.
That's the thing. I would say, oh yeah, I could beat that easily. But I also fall asleep as soon as I get tired. So there is no opportunity for me to stay up for 40 hours.
That is also true. But again, if I was pressed, I'd be like, yes, I absolutely could. If you gave me the prep time, I would absolutely try. Because it doesn't have to be good stand-up. It just has to be stand-up.
Yeah, I think of the two, holding your breath versus just really long stand-up, I would have to try the really long stand-up because it just seems like it would be a little bit easier.
And if you fail, there's like no repercussions. If you fail at holding your breath for a long time, things might get dangerous.
Yeah, you're right.
So, going from that, let's actually get into this episode. This episode was called Dear Peggy. BJ writes a letter home to his wife while there's a lull in the action. The letter includes the 4077 breaking a world record, a big, mean chaplain coming to visit, and Klinger's multiple escape attempts. Vanessa, what did you think about this episode?
This was a cute episode. I really liked this one. It definitely wasn't an all-time favorite of mine, I don't think. But I think that this one had some good parts to it.
And BJ, this is like the one real big kind of character moment for him in the episode, and it comes very early, jumps in and does his absolute best to resuscitate this guy. And I love that. I love that BJ is like a really good doctor. I like that he's, they say he's like fresh out of medical school, so he's a little more willing to like put stuff on the line and like not follow like rules directly because he is like fresh out of it. I really like this whole section, and I know you did too.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I thought that the camera, the direction, yes, yes. The direction in this episode was really top notch because we got really great scenes throughout this whole episode, like really good camera shots. Mm-hmm. And when BJ kind of jumps in and starts to try to revive this patient, there's this really intense scene and this really intense camera shot of him pushing on his chest, and it was so good. And it also, like you said, this character development for BJ was really great to see too, because I feel like BJ was just so intense in this scene.
Yeah.
In a way that I feel Hawkeye would have also jumped in and tried to save this patient, right? He was not going to let, he would not have let Frank just kind of throw this patient out once his heart stopped. But I feel the intensity with which BJ dove in there and was, for all intents and purposes, very dramatic, like Frank said.
Yeah. Very action hero.
Yeah, and I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing, but it was just more dramatic than maybe Hawkeye would have been. And I like that intensity from him because he's new and because he's young. And I think that still... I think that the writers continuing to showcase that is really cool because BJ is still relatively new. And I don't know. I like that they're still drawing those comparisons between who BJ is and who Hawkeye is.
Yeah, he's got something to prove, you know? I'm going to give Frank a little bit of credit here, actually, is that, you know, Frank puts up a little bit of like a fuss about it, but he does immediately help BJ, like with the anesthesia and everything. Mm-hmm. So it's like, Frank, you know, it's not the best doctor in the world, and he will like fight you a little bit, but he's not going to like be like, no, I'm not going to help you. I declared this guy dead. He did like do his job. And I feel like at this point in the show, we gotta give him just a little bit of credit where it's due. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay, I guess so. But we also have to note that Frank was very upset with BJ for quote unquote going over his head. He didn't like the way that he went about saving the patient. Okay, Frank, sure. What's more important, your rank or saving a person's life? But, you know, we're just preaching to the choir here. Everyone knows that we do not like Frank Burns. and I will give him as little credit as possible.
And to take back some of the credit that I just gave, he was very snarky about it because Frank was like, ha ha ha, I told you. Like, when it wasn't working, he was like, see, I was right. And it was just like, come on, buddy. Come on.
I know. It's so terrible. But after that scene, too, I don't know if you picked up on this, but there was a little bit of continuity here with BJ's character. Ooh. Because he was writing this letter to Peg, his wife, and he was saying how he was worried about this patient, so he couldn't sleep and he stayed up all night with him. And that had happened before, and it happened one night when BJ was new to the outfit still, like really new, and his patient just wasn't getting better and he couldn't sleep, so he stayed up all night. So I really liked how the writers kind of threw that in there with a continuity of character for BJ as well.
Yeah, I like that too. I did not pick up on that like you did, but you bring that up. I'm like, all right, they are mapping it all out. You know, they do take this into consideration. I really do appreciate that. And again, I think that's a thing of him being so new and so like fresh to things, that he is so worried about everyone he operates on. Like, he kind of needs them all to be safe, where if, you know, you're there for a longer period of time, you're less inclined to be that worried about everyone.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And then also in this scene, we get the first kind of discussion about really the main portion of this episode that follows Father Mulcahy. So Father Mulcahy is talking to BJ, and he is quite worried because this high-ranking chaplain, this colonel
Yeah.
chaplain kind of guy, is coming to kind of evaluate Father Mulcahy's work at the 4077. And Father Mulcahy is quite worried about it. So I thought that this scene was interesting because of something that Father Mulcahy says. But what did you think about this little first introduction?
This was so, like, odd and interesting to me because you don't really think about Father Mulcahy having to really answer to someone. He's kind of outside of the typical, like, military unit kind of thing. He's, you know, the religious man. It's a very separate discipline. And him being, like, worried about a superior and, like, calling the superior, like, one of the most famously scary chaplains of all time, and, like, whatever he says specifically.
He calls him Attila the Hun of chaplains, which is such an oxymoron.
That is so good. The Attila the Hun of chaplains, which is quite the mental image. I feel like you do not want to be the Attila the Hun of chaplains. I feel like you're not doing your job properly at that point, but who am I to judge?
I would think so, but again, who am I to judge? I am certainly no chaplain.
I thought this storyline was really interesting, and I liked getting more into Father Mulcahy, even though it is kind of at odds with, like, the title of the episode.
Yeah, one thing that I had mentioned before that this scene was interesting to me was because BJ says to Father Mulcahy that Hawkeye has mentioned that Father Mulcahy is the best chaplain that there ever was. And Father Mulcahy is very touched by this, and he goes, "Oh, Hawkeye, that crazy agnostic." And I kind of thought that it was so cute because I feel like Hawkeye would kind of maybe be agnostic, right? And I like the idea that Father Mulcahy and Hawkeye have discussed religion at points in time.
They've talked shop, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like it would also track with Hawkeye to kind of go to the source if he was questioning any type of religiosity that he held or religious beliefs that he held, to go directly to Father Mulcahy to kind of discuss it, because he's so smart that he would go directly to the person who knows best. And so that was just like an interesting little funny tidbit that they kind of threw in there. I'm, of course, probably reading a little bit into it, but I thought it was interesting that they put it in there.
I think that you're pretty on the money. One thing that I always like about this show is, like, the religious kind of things in it. Like, I like that Father Mulcahy is very accepting of everyone and is just generally a really good dude. Because in this show, which is largely like a satire on, like, war in the military, it would have been so easy to make Father Mulcahy, like, kind of like, you know, one of those religious caricatures who's just, like, not a good dude. And I genuinely appreciate that they, like, took the time to make him, like, a fully well-rounded, accepting character. You know what I mean? And I think him being so accepting of Hawkeye being agnostic, I just think adds to that. And, like, there's a bit later on in the episode where they talk about, like, Passover or something coming up. And, you know, it's just a very, like, you know, everybody's cool. And I appreciate the everybody's cool aspect of Father Mulcahy's character.
I think that it is so sweet also that if Hawkeye was potentially, like, questioning religious beliefs that he had, that Father Mulcahy would be like, "Oh, okay, that's okay." Like, obviously he was going to do what he does best and, like, try to convince him and whatnot. But I think that the fact that he's able to kind of, like, meet people where they are, I don't know. It just,
I think
like,
that's the best.
Yeah, it really contributes to my love for this character because he is just, like, such a good person.
Yeah, he's who, like, you want to talk to about this kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And then right after this scene too, this is another scene that I noted to be kind of interesting about BJ, to kind of switching gears here. But BJ again continues his letter to his wife Peg, and he mentions to Hawkeye that it was Peg's first overseas package to him, and he had, like, a cake that she sent him, and the chocolate that she sent him melted on his, like, underwear or whatever it was. And it was really cute. And I really liked how the writers are still kind of taking the time to settle BJ in. I think that just shows how much care that they put into this show and how much they cared about the show and the characters and the audience liking the characters too. They're just not shying away from the fact that he hasn't been here for that long. And I don't know, I've definitely mentioned this in previous episodes that I really appreciate that. But again, to see it after all of this time, 11 episodes in, definitely 11 weeks into the show, if it was airing normally, that it's still something great that I think that they took the time to do.
I absolutely agree. And I really liked in this continuation of the letter, this might not be the specific scene, but in this letter, he constantly reiterates how much he loves his wife and just writes that on every page. And to go back to people watching this in real time, if you're a big fan of MASH, you know that infidelity is a big recurring subject in these characters previously to Colonel Potter and BJ's introduction. So I really like that they continue to hammer home that he is new, and unlike Trapper, unlike Henry, unlike Frank, they are committed men. They really enjoy their spouses just as individuals, and it's nice to see.
Yeah, it's pretty refreshing, I would say. So, as I mentioned, BJ is continuing to write the letter to his wife. And this is where our discussion of the world records comes in. Right. We did not just mention that in a vacuum, because BJ recounts to Peg that Hawkeye read that there was a college campus that packed 15 people into a Volkswagen or something like that. And that was the world record for the most amount of people in a vehicle or something crazy like that. And so, of course, Hawkeye's yeah, we're going to beat the world record. So they're trying to shove 10 tons of people into this Jeep. And it's the comedy that you would expect from MASH. This is such a MASH-ism.
This is perfect 70s sitcom slapstick comedy. This is so cute and funny and absurd, and I felt really captured the feeling of the fun part of world records that I really enjoy. The idea that you can do them yourself. That's what I was trying to say with the stand-up comedy of hey, anybody can accomplish this. It really doesn't take a lot to shove a lot of people into a Jeep. And I really liked Hawkeye slowly convincing Margaret to join in. I thought that was so funny, and I love that she was wearing pigtails in this scene. I was ooh, that's a spicy hairstyle for her.
Yeah, I think that's so funny because Margaret had just a big smile on her face, and it didn't take a lot of convincing. As soon as Frank walked away, she was kind of into it, and it was funny, probably coincidental, but pretty funny to me that she was wearing pigtails,
which are very childlike. So
right,
it's just
exactly.
She's having fun.
Yeah, exactly, and she was kind of allowing herself to have fun. I don't know. This scene was just so cute, so wholesome, and they all shoved in, and they all took this picture, and it was just so cute.
And the picture they took, especially the frame that they had when it was actually being taken, I felt was a perfect poster. You could absolutely take that image, maybe paint it out a little bit, make an Animal House style poster of it and be MASH, Thursdays at 8, Yeah, I feel
definitely.
That's a great representation of the series, especially with everybody smiling and laughing. It was a great time.
I loved it. Unfortunately, though, the fun kind of comes to an end after this, because this is when the dreaded Colonel Chapman. I have to figure out what his name is. Hang on. I can't keep
MASH.
going with this. Ugh, I just love BJ also so much. He's truly. I love Hawkeye, but I also just love BJ so much. I don't know. There's just something about him that I just love, and I'm so happy that Hollister, that's what it is. I'm just so happy that he's
in
here.
The show now, and we get to talk about him.
I mean, I love Trapper too, but I don't know. BJ is just truly one of my favorite characters, in shows in general.
I mean, I've only had 11 episodes with him, but I like that he's just a sweet kind guy who's like willing to really fight for people's well-being. That's just like nice to see.
Yeah, I think that like, and again, this is my first time truly analyzing the episodes and the differences between Trapper and BJ and stuff like that, but it's just so fun to me to see those differences and how like kid-like BJ is, he is young and he is so childlike. I'm pretty sure he's only supposed to be like our age.
28. He's a bit older than us. Let's give us a little bit of credit here, but he's like 28, I think. Which is very young.
I feel like I remember them saying he was 26. Obviously, Mike Farrell was not 26.
Yeah, that's...
it was very obvious. But also,
medical school is rough, so...
That's true. I probably look like I'm 32, so... I love how young and jovial BJ is, and when he goes through some stuff in the later episodes and the later seasons, I think that it's just so good. It's really good. It's
a good counterpoint because he's not snarky in the way that like Trapper really was. Like he's just a genuine optimistic guy who like loves people. And like Trapper was, again, like Hawkeye, this very like cynical dude, has this, satirical outlook on things, and it's like a good counterbalance. Something that I don't think like would work in the early seasons because you kind of need those two guys playing with each other, but now that we have like 4 seasons, this is like a fun different dynamic of like, oh, this is a different type of person.
Right, exactly. And I love that BJ is kind of like he's such a wise ass, but not in the same way that Hawkeye is, in those like really subtle differences. Like they do complement each other a lot, of course, like Hawkeye and Trapper did, but there are those differences, and the way that they write BJ's humor is definitely distinct from Hawkeye's, and I don't know. It's just so fun. I love him so much.
He's not trying to be mean when he does these little comments, but he
they feel so genuine.
Part of snark.
It feels so much like genuine snark from him too. Like I do think that the writers do a really good job of, in all of the show, just like making the humor seem very genuine. Like, this is actually how BJ talks, you know what I mean? Instead of, like, this is how the joke is supposed to land. And it is... I was watching an episode... not to completely derail us, but, like, I was watching an episode recently, and it was just like, oh my god, he's, like, said something so offhand. I was like, wow, I fucking love him. I was like, we would get along.
See, that's, like, the best part of a good sitcom, too, is, like, oh, these would be my friends. Like, healthy... parasocial things because they're fictional characters and you're not like grafting onto like a real person.
Right, exactly.
It's a delight.
I do love it. Okay, to jump back into our main discussion, this chaplain, his name is Hollister, he comes and visits conveniently right as everyone is popping out of the Jeep, including Father Mulcahy, looking very disheveled.
And I like that Hollister here was like, hey, where's Father Mulcahy? He's supposed to put a kibosh on this kind of activity. And I'm like, really? It's not like a religious matter, and they're not doing anything like inappropriate. They're just piling into a Jeep. Like, I feel like on the scale of things that are inappropriate to do on a military base, religious-wise, like, getting into a Jeep with a bunch of other people, probably pretty low.
Maybe, but also I guess it's like a lot of people touching. I don't know.
But they're not like touching sexually. They're just touching.
It's not like they're piling into the Jeep completely naked. So
I would say it's less sexual than a game of Twister. Was this?
I think that this man was probably just looking for things to ride Father Mulcahy on.
I would say so.
Because, and then right after this, when poor Father Mulcahy is like, oh no, my superiors are here to come look at the work that I'm doing, and I've just got sat on by a bunch of people. The next scene is Father Mulcahy delivering a sermon, and Colonel Hollister really did not like Father Mulcahy's sermon, which I thought was quite mean. I didn't like that.
I did not get that vibe that this was not a good sermon. If you're paying attention to Larry Linville's performance, I don't know if this is like written that way, but it was kind of clear that like Frank didn't really know the words. Like I feel like Larry Linville played it like Frank didn't know the words, even though he's supposed to be a very religious man. And I like that. It adds another layer of like hypocrisy to Frank, even if subtly. But otherwise, I did not get the vibe this is a bad sermon. I feel like this guy was just being pedantic.
He was, and I mean, he was definitely trying to get Father Mulcahy to do a more fire and brimstone type sermon. And that's just not who Father Mulcahy is. Yeah. It's very obvious. It's just like not his style, right? And this is another scene where I really loved the directing and the camera angles too, because of the way that the camera was kind of angled up at Colonel Hollister while he was giving this really like he was yelling at Father Mulcahy, but also giving him an example of the type of sermon he quote unquote should be doing. But also on your point about Frank, I thought it was so annoying that Frank and Margaret afterwards were kind of like low key calling Father Mulcahy bad at his job too, because they shook hands with Colonel Hollister. They're like, oh, it's so nice to have like a real spiritual leader here. Meanwhile, everybody else showed up to support Father Mulcahy and were really like laying it on thick. And of course, Frank and Margaret were like, actually, you're higher ranking than him, so you're automatically better in our minds.
Any opportunity to brown nose, they will. Even if they are like... yeah, you're right. Frank and Margaret are like the worst people alive. They just continue to demonstrate that. It's so silly. They're so unnecessarily mean.
And I feel like that probably contributed to why Colonel Hollister was like, you need to be more commanding in your relaying of sermons and whatnot. So I don't know. The whole thing just rubbed me the wrong way because, like we said, we enjoy who Father Mulcahy is so much that the idea that he should change to be more of this commanding religious leader was upsetting.
Yeah. It's like, come on, man. He's a good guy. I feel like they should recognize good guys when they do exist. And Colonel Hollister's performance here was the moment that I clocked that this guest star was probably a very big celebrity. And we'll get into that during trivia, but this was a very big, showy performance that I feel like you only give to like a top-notch like actor, you know? So
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
For the rest of this episode, I was like, who is this guy?
Yeah, I really have to commend the performance of this actor who played Colonel Hollister as well, because in this scene, he was really commanding and he really sold it as this fire and brimstone type preacher. And then in the next scene too, he was so infuriating because he was basically, I described him as the religious version of just regular army. He was very bureaucratic in the way that he wanted things to be done and was telling Father Mulcahy to do things as well. Like, for example, when he was telling Father Mulcahy to write the letter to the soldiers, the wounded soldiers' parents, telling them that he was going to pull through. And Father Mulcahy said, well, that's not typically how I do it. I make sure that he's actually going to pull through first before I write home to any family members. And Colonel Hollister was like, no, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. You have to just say that he's going to be better and then it'll make him better and that's it. And I feel like that was such a comment about how this guy was just regular army. Like, we've seen this so many times before with colonels and generals coming to the camp saying, this is how things are supposed to be done. This is what you should be doing, without taking into account any reality of the situation at the 4077. And that might not be how you can do it in reality. It might be how you're supposed to do it by the book, but not really how you actually can do it. So I thought that was really interesting.
This was a very classic. Normally, like, these guys tend to have a little bit more of a point, you know? But this, I was just absolutely not on his side for. I was like, no, you cannot do that. You cannot send someone a letter home saying their loved one's getting better before they're actually better. Like, I don't know if it's in real life, but I know they mention in other, like, military war movies. So, like, the policy in good terms is, like, not to inform people until, like, things are set. And this, I was just like, absolutely do not do that. I was not on this guy's side at all.
No, definitely not. And this also reminded me of a character in the book too. I don't know if you remember, but there was a chaplain or some kind of person who was insisting that they write letters home to
Right,
wounded
right.
soldiers' families before they were actually stable. And then I think in the book it ended up a person died and Trapper was really upset about it. Do you remember
Mm-hmm.
that?
No,
Yeah,
I think that's like what I'm thinking of like, oh, this is why you don't do that.
right.
Um, so yeah, that it's so funny what they like pull from the book still.
Yeah.
That there's still like material to be mined from the earlier chapters. That's really cool. But this is just a classic MASH bureaucrat bad guy, just absolutely not seeing the humanity of the situation, especially when he should see the kind of more complicated humanity of it as they're like a religious man, who has to like deal with people.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too to me that the writers chose to do this because I can imagine that this might have been a little bit controversial to kind of portray this
Yeah.
chaplain in not the best light, paired with last week's episode of somebody saying things about being Jesus Christ and also Frank's religious hypocrisy and whatnot. I think that it was interesting that they were kind of writing religion so hard. And
It's a very consistent thing with the last couple episodes.
yeah, and I think that that's really interesting because as the show kind of shifts, the show was never one to really shy away from stuff. Like as they were including gay characters in the early 70s, like that
Yeah.
was pretty monumental. So I just think it's really interesting that they were kind of also critiquing religious aspect, like or religion or like religious establishments or stuff like that.
Well, again, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier with Paul Mulcahy just being a good guy. Like, he's
Mm-hmm.
a good example of this establishment. I think that gives them a lot of leeway to criticize and satirize in other areas when it comes to religion, because you
Yeah,
have this
definitely.
this character who is just unambiguously great guy and a great example of like what you should be doing as like a follower of this religion. There's no negative traits to him. He just gets along with everybody. So I think when you have that, like a good core, you're allowed to be a little bit more exploratory, because it's not saying that this entire establishment is bad. It's saying that like
No,
the
no, yeah.
individual is bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I said, I think that it's just interesting that they were willing to portray a religious person or not even a religious person, but like a clergy member
Yeah.
as not the best guy. So yeah, so I just thought that that was really interesting. And I feel like it also came about in the last scene too, when the soldier who BJ had saved previously started going under. Like his pulse
Mm-hmm.
started dropping, he had a fever, stuff like that. And you could tell that Father Mulcahy was really upset about having written that letter and sent that letter because you know that he would have blamed himself as well.
Yeah.
And
He
I
says something along the lines of like it being a bad thing, like cosmically, like this is
yeah,
like his punishment for doing so. So like I'm glad this guy pulled through, because that I imagine would have been devastating to Father Mulcahy, especially because he never wanted to send it anyway. This wasn't a lesson that he needed to learn.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that what surprised me about the show too was that Father Mulcahy was like kind of in a very subtle way was almost grappling with religion a little bit
A little
in
bit.
the way that the colonel was saying, you know, if you write it, you kind of speak it into existence that he will pull through before you know for sure. And it kind of featured Father Mulcahy almost questioning that a little bit of just like,
Yeah.
okay, no, that's not necessarily the case. And like comparing it to like God's will versus medicine almost. So I thought that that was just a really subtle, really interesting thing that the writers put in there. And I appreciated that they did.
Yeah, it's very nuanced. He's a very like religious man, but he's also more willing to like think about the implications of if it doesn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
Um which again, I think is great. Like they do have just this great core character that they can explore other like facets of the kind of like faults in it without sort of saying that this entire system is bad. It's cool.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I like how they talked about religion without being like hypercritical of it too.
Yeah.
So I think
or
it was
like
just
preachy. It's a good balance.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just a really good job on the writer's part. So like we said, also the soldier thankfully miraculously pulled through, and no thanks to Frank Burns because Frank actually left shell fragments inside the poor boy. So thank you, Frank.
Oh, I take back the credit I gave him.
Yes, we can never credit Frank Burns too much because he will always do something that will end up biting us in the ass for speaking his praise. Yes, exactly. We also didn't mention that this soldier is from New Jersey. So
Right. That's the classic. We always have to mention anybody from New Jersey at any point.
There will always be a New Jersey connection.
And what we didn't mention was Klinger's little side adventures, which I just want to bring up very quickly, was Klinger throughout this entire episode, he had a dream that he finally got out of the army for being crazy. And so he really wants to make his dream come true and just finally puts it into high gear. He's back on the horse. He's trying to really come up with all these sorts of schemes. And it's just great that they all kind of happen in the background and they get more and more elaborate.
Yeah, I really loved that. I love that no Letter Home episode is complete without Klinger trying to get out of the army. I think that has been consistent. Yeah, exactly. That's just been consistent throughout the entire series of the show thus far. And my favorite part about this was when he was captured trying to escape and he blew up an inflatable raft in Colonel Potter's office and it knocked Colonel Potter out of his chair. Oh, just the comedy gold. It was so funny.
I love a good raft joke. You'd be surprised at how many like sitcoms deploy raft blowing up.
Yes.
It was great. And I have to shout out Klinger in the very beginning of this episode. Phil McKay, playing piano and Klinger's just on top of the piano in like a cocktail dress, like the very stereotypical like hot lady thing, and everyone was just like, yeah, this is cool. It was so funny because you have like other things happening in the background, like you had like Radar and Nurse Kelly dancing with each other, so they were not like noticing this at all. It was just a normal thing for them.
I really liked how he was just kind of like hanging off of Father Mulcahy's piano, like languishing in a very dramatic way. It was very cute. One other scene that I want to mention really quick was when Frank and Hawkeye were trying to teach local Korean people English because Colonel Potter kind of wanted to be able to give these local Koreans jobs in the hospital. So when Frank was teaching them like anti-communist rhetoric, and then Hawkeye immediately jumps in and is like, Frank Burns eats worms. And I feel like that is just such a classic line from these episodes.
That is big sibling energy right there. Like the second you can make fun of someone or tell someone else to like call someone else a mean name, you absolutely do it. Especially like Frank Burns eats worms is just such a sibling thing. Like one time my brother, when you came over my house for like the first time, he gathered all his like friends and they were like 10 years old and they all just like chanted on the lawn of my house that I'm a dingus, and it was the funniest thing that's ever happened to me.
Yes, I do recall that. I do remember that. That is a core memory for me.
They all just called me a dingus. It was very like, well, this isn't even embarrassing. This is just funny.
I really do feel like I have seen Frank Burns Eats Worms on a shirt before, and I would like to find it, and I would like to wear it.
Yes, absolutely. And then at the very end of the episode, when Hawkeye gets all these Korean individuals to say that Frank's a ferret face. Delightful.
Good one, ferret face. Amazing.
And last thing that I do want to shout out while we're kind of going through miscellaneous things throughout the episode is that just in one scene in the background when they're kind of like walking through camp, there's a woman getting her hair shampooed, and that just really stuck out to me. It was very strange.
I do remember that.
Why? Why is this just in the background? And I couldn't help but think of the actress who, you know, through multiple takes of this little walk and talk, was just had to get like relathered and had like a bunch of people touching her hair. I was like, oh, that's hard work. Stand up for extras, am I right?
Yeah, definitely. We love a MASH background scene. Always something interesting going on there. So, Ethan, I know that we talked about some funny lines in the episode, but do you have any favorite one-liners from this episode?
Yeah, I mean, we said a lot of lines that I liked in this episode throughout this episode, because this is not a line-heavy episode. But I will mention this one that takes a lot of context to, like, understand, but I just think is very funny on its own, where Hawkeye very sincerely, Alan Alda did a great job delivering this, just says, Nikki Hampton is vice president now? And he says it with so much sincerity. It stood out. It was so funny.
Yeah, that was a good one. I really liked that one as well, because you're right. Alan Alda's deliverance of that. No, deliverance. Yeah, deliverance. Alan Alda's delivery of that line was really funny.
That was not him being snarky like he usually is. You were just like, wait, did that happen?
Wait a minute. The only line that I noted down, even though there were several funny ones, but I just thought that this was quite bold for the writers. When they are piling everybody into a Jeep for breaking the world record, and Hawkeye is trying to like kind of goad Margaret into participating, and she says, "This is completely beneath me." And Hawkeye says, "I was hoping for that spot myself." And I just feel like that was like the sexual innuendos in this Oh my God. The sexual innuendos in this, what is it called?
Show?
No, not
Segment?
show. Season.
Season.
I just feel the sexual innuendos in this season have been really towing the line here. They are ramping up. They're really getting to a place that I'm like, woo, that is dicey for 70s sitcoms.
Or even when they're in the Jeep, Margaret says, "Oh, get my good side," and she's like getting into the Jeep, and Hawkeye's like, "Oh, you know I will," and then he like smacks her butt a little bit. I was like, "That's bold."
Yeah. That is
bold,
so
dude.
bold. That's so bold, and I'm just kind of really shocked at the ramping up of the sexual innuendos, which is so crazy because, in all honesty, the show is becoming like less sexual, especially in this part of the season. Like definitely you don't see Hawkeye going on as many dates with nurses, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that they're still putting it in there is very funny to me.
I mean, you gotta get it out of your system somewhere.
Yeah, you're right. You are right.
So Vanessa, this episode has a pretty famous guest star. I'm curious of what the trivia for him might be.
Yes. So I do have some trivia about Ned Beatty as Colonel Hollister, or as I like to refer to him, the Mean Priest.
Yes, the Mean Priest.
So Ned Beatty was born on July 6, 1937 in Louisville, Kentucky. Beatty started singing at a young age and received a scholarship to sing in the a cappella choir at Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky.
Transylvania University sounds quite ominous. And or a prequel to Hotel Transylvania. But that's pretty cool. Very talented young man. Very early age.
Yeah, definitely. Beatty began acting in 1956 at 19 and first began his career with state theater troupes in Kentucky, Virginia, and Indiana. Beatty had a really extensive career, like we mentioned, but mostly played guest and supporting roles, which he actually said he preferred because leading roles were, quote, more trouble than they're worth. I thought that was pretty interesting.
That I can relate to. If I was an actor, I don't think I'd want the weight of the entire project on my shoulders.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That would be pretty intimidating, I think. Beatty made his film acting debut in 1972 with Deliverance, which, Ethan, you and I were obsessed with in high school.
Yes, we were. I've been trying to figure out like where I know Ned Beatty from specifically, and probably Deliverance.
He was also in the Christopher Reeve version of Superman in Superman 2, and I believe that Christopher Reeve is the only true Superman. Fight me.
It's the only good Superman movie so far, so...
He was also in All the President's Men and Network, for which he was nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor.
Wow, okay. Pretty accomplished. I haven't seen Network. Network is a classic. I gotta check that out.
Yeah. Other movies Beatty appeared in are The Incredible Shrinking Woman, The Fourth Protocol, Prelude to a Kiss, He Got Game, Where the Red Fern Grows, Shooter, and Charlie Wilson's War, just to name a few. Man,
those are all, like, famous movies. A lot of the guest stars we cover are like, oh, I've never heard of that. But those are like, yeah, I've seen Where the Red Fern Grows, stuff like that. I'm like, finally, things I've heard of.
Yeah, he definitely was in a lot of very famous movies. And despite not liking starring roles, Beatty did get top billing in several movies throughout his career. He starred in the 2010 film The Killer Inside Me and voiced the evil teddy bear in Toy Story 3, as well as voicing a character in the animated film Rango starring Johnny Depp.
Yo, that's pretty incredible. That's actually probably where I know Ned Beatty from the best.
And it's so funny because the character of that evil teddy bear in Toy Story 3, if you look at Ned Beatty at the time that he voiced it and the character of that teddy bear, they look very similar. It's very funny.
Yeah.
And like his movie career, Beatty's television career was also quite extensive. Besides MASH, he had guest appearances on The Rockford Files, Kojak, The Waltons, Gunsmoke, Hawaii Five-0, and Murder, She Wrote.
Ah, the classic Murder, She Wrote.
He starred in the first 3 seasons of the TV show version of Homicide: Life on the Street, and also starred in the TV movie version of the show.
Okay.
He also starred in the TV movie Friendly Fire in 1979 and was nominated for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Limited Series. And Friendly Fire actually went on to win 4 Emmys itself. So I'm actually really curious about that one.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one, but I'm sure it's good, actually.
He had a recurring role on the sitcom Roseanne, and he had a supporting role in the TV miniseries Last Train Home, for which he was nominated for an Emmy for Best Supporting Actor. In 2004, Beatty returned to acting on the stage for the Broadway run of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and won a Drama Desk Award for Outstanding Featured Actor in a Play.
Man, this is maybe the most accomplished guy we've talked about so far. And we've talked about like Ron Howard and stuff, so I'm curious of who else appeared on the show where we're going to just get to sing their acolytes.
Yeah, there will be a lot more, so buckle up. And unfortunately, Beatty passed away from natural causes on June 13th, 2021 at the age of 83.
Wow, that's so recent. That's, natural causes probably best way to go, though.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with just passing away peacefully. So I'm so glad that we got to learn about Beatty's career, and I'm so glad that I got to share it with everybody who's listening.
So Vanessa, that obviously means we have to rewatch Deliverance in his tribute sometime soon.
Oh gosh. Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Okay.
So Ethan, what was your martini rating for this episode?
This episode was good. I don't think it was like great. So I think we're going to go like a 3.5. Like I like this one. It's solid. It's better than average. But again, nothing like stood out to me as like, this is an excellent episode. This is just like a fun hangout episode. And I do like that we get a little bit more of Father Mulcahy's kind of characterization in this one, even though it's very clearly supposed to be a BJ episode, which is very strange.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Nothing was groundbreaking in this episode, even though I did like the commentary about Colonel Hollister. But I gave this episode a 3 out of 5 martinis.
Ooh, we can never be the same. It continues to be true.
I do think, though, that I see your 3.5 because as I talked about this episode, I realized that I did like it a little bit more than I thought. But I still think objectively I would stick with 3.
No disrespect there. So, just to wrap up, we'd like to give thanks to Jacob Friabalco for being our technical consultant, Vanessa's sister, Melissa, for our awesome cover art, and, of course, our listeners. Thank you so much for listening. Links to our music, social media, and contact the show are linked in the description as always, and join us next week for Season 4, Episode 12 of Moose and Men. But until then, don't forget to shave your hairy knuckles if you're trying to escape from the army. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everyone.